Welcome back to another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm Chris Bedford here with John Daniel Davidson, and we're here to talk about what we saw a little bit on the campaign trail when we had a road trip across Michigan and Wisconsin, and how we were feeling about that. Welcome to the show, John.
Thanks.
Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you.
I'm sure you weren't sick of me by the end of sharing hotel rooms for 8 days. So
not
here
at all.
we go again.
Not at all. My liver was sick of you, though.
So we started off in landing in Detroit and going to some of the suburbs there, some of the places that had swayed, some of the places that had voted for Barack Obama and then voted for Donald Trump. Some of the times in the states we went to, these were huge swing votes, and that's where we focused on our journey. So went up first to the home of the Reagan Democrats, and Macomb County, and started talking to people. And one of the first places that we got there, we just met up and we grabbed some lunch. I remember thinking how interesting it was. The bartender or the owner of the bar was a liberal. He had volunteered for Barack Obama's campaign. There was not really any volunteering going on this round because of the virus. And he'd actually met Vice President Joe Biden in the past. And he said that he was worried. So what were some of your immediate takeaways from getting there, not knowing what's going on and just looking at the polls and seeing, it looks like Donald Trump's behind?
Yeah, right. The polls should have given us a bit of a different impression than what we got, certainly at this bar, and I think in Macomb County in general. The bartender was a Biden guy, and as you say, he was worried because he said all of his neighbors, have Trump signs. And I think he also said he didn't want to put out a Biden sign in front of his house because he was afraid people would rip it down. But he was sort of a lone voice, and you kind of got the sense that you understood why he was worried. Even in his own bar, there was a kind of a crowded, it was a crowded lunchtime scene at the bar. There was a guy sitting next to me who was a Republican. He said he was reluctantly voting for Trump, thinks Trump's an asshole, he said.
I recall that. And he was a quiet man, too.
That's right. And then there was there were people coming in with there was one guy with a MAGA hat on. And then there was the whole subtext of the mask thing. The bar owner kept having to harass people to put their masks on and explain to us that, the mask thing is a real, like it is in other places, a real kind of cultural, political touchstone that sort of indicates where someone falls on the political spectrum. And he seemed, my impression was that a lot of his customers are Trump supporters, and he knows that. And a lot of his neighbors are Trump supporters, and he knows that. And he seemed worried. I don't know if you remember, he said that he was worried. Part of the reason he's worried is because there's no Biden campaign presence. That he said, you could go to the local Democratic headquarters down the street, no one's there, and there's no outreach at all to speak of in Macomb County.
I remember those two young men walking in wearing MAGA hats shortly after you told us about this. It seemed like as soon as somebody warned us or gave us a heads up, or especially someone who was very pro-mask gave us a heads up about the culture and the divide on mask, it would happen right in front of us.
Yeah, right.
Just a few days later, leaving a restaurant after the bartender complained about mask shamers. Now in Washington D.C., where I'm at, and where you are, it's a mask culture. You get shamed for not wearing one. But it was funny to walk out of that bar in Milwaukee a few days later and immediately have a woman say, "You pussy, take that mask off," because we were outside.
That's right. I forgot about that. Yeah, the bartender told us oh yeah, you get harassed, if you wear a mask around here. And I remember thinking that was also completely unexpected. Milwaukee, deep blue city, votes Democratic by wide margins, and always has. And we were downtown in a dining district. And the last thing I thought, and we had just put our masks, and I'm not big, I'm not fanatical about masks. It's kind of, it's as a courtesy to the business or whatever. but we hadn't walked out of that bar but 30 seconds, and that couple was like, "Don't have to wear masks, assholes," or what, whatever. It's like, whoa, okay,
we just left the bar.
Yeah, I expected that sort of thing, like in some of the small towns that we went through in western Wisconsin or in central Michigan. I didn't expect it in downtown Milwaukee.
No, and I've been in a lot of places, going through rural places, covering coronavirus and the elections. And that was the first time I'd encountered it. It was right after we were awarded. And to be fair, the only time I encountered it.
That's right. But that wasn't the only thing in Milwaukee that was surprising, because, while we're on the subject of Milwaukee, we got to talk about the German bar on the night of the vice presidential debate. We find a place to eat. A lot of places are still closed because of the coronavirus. We find a German restaurant to eat at of this historic old.
And the Midwest makes such good German food, because I'm from Boston, where it's Irish, and we don't make really good food of anything outside of seafood. I always love going to a good German place when we're out in Milwaukee or Ohio or Wisconsin.
And it was great. This was a like authentic German. Look, I had been there for many years. And there wasn't hardly anyone there. There was a handful of dudes at the bar, and we walk in, we order. About 10 minutes after we walk in, two more like middle-aged white Midwestern dudes walk in and ask kind of sheepishly if we can turn off the NBA playoffs and turn on the vice presidential debate.
Well, that's like 2020 in a capsule right there.
Exactly.
Nobody wants to watch the NBA game at the bar.
I know. It hadn't even. It had never occurred to me that we would go into a bar in Milwaukee and some guys would come in and say, "Can we turn on the vice presidential debates?" And they were like, "We won't comment on it. We're
not backing anyone.
We're not backing anyone." And it within 5 minutes, it became clear that everybody at the bar, except for the 19-year-old barback, was a huge Trump supporter. And before the end of the night, they were ordering shots for Mike Pence for the bar.
I remember as soon as I said, "We're not backing anyone, we just want to watch," I poked you and said, "These guys are Donald Trump supporters," because in Milwaukee, just like in Boston or Washington or a lot of other cities, you don't have to hide that you're a Joe Biden supporter.
That's right.
But it turned out we were uncovering it all over the place. And then so after swinging through, Macomb County is a place that Macomb County is a place that hadn't gone Republican since Ronald Reagan. Those Reagan Democrats didn't really seem to stick around. Some of them did, but at least not right there. Barack Obama won it. And then up in Saginaw County, a place that's made famous by some country music, we did see a little bit of Democratic activity. We saw a downtown office that had a lot of signs and some quilts, and it was very careful. MSNBC was on the television, I recall, at the back. And they were hurting because of a lack of foot traffic, I recall, because they have a nice downtown office, but no one's coming in because of coronavirus. And we talked to some of the union people. I remember you calling a representative of the United Auto Workers, which you have to go all the way up to the national level. And they claimed the union was entirely united behind Joe Biden, that they were voting together, which we know that seems suspicious. We went to the GOP office in Saginaw. We saw multiple people coming in throughout the entire visit to pick up signs, to talk business. And they had told us, granted, they've got a dog in the race, that there were a lot of union guys coming in and saying that they back Trump and they would like to get a sign. What were some of your takeaways from? Did you see just more of the same in Saginaw, or is it a little bit different, another auto workers area?
Yeah, I mean, one of the guys we talked to at the GOP office was, so all the guys there, the Republican guys, were just local business owners, right? They weren't elected officials. They're just volunteers who are business owners from Saginaw and know a lot of union people, have a lot of union people in their family. The one gentleman we talked to grew up. Both his parents were UAW workers with GM, I think, and they were very adamant that what the union official line was that only about 30% of our members support the Republican candidate this time around, and that's the same as it was for Romney. It's the same as it was for McCain, and that's sort of been the UAW line
And it's just not true. It's not remotely true.
It's not remotely true. And that's what these guys were telling us. They said, I can't tell you how many union members have come in here and said, I know that our union officially is endorsing Biden, but we're not voting with the union. We're voting for Trump. And we have like some Trump signs and Trump swag. And the reason they said that was happening is because they have a memory in that part of the state of times getting tough with these global free trade agreements, with NAFTA, with layoffs at the factories, and with their city and their community really struggling. And so, when Trump comes along for the first time in decades, that a candidate from either party has talked to these issues and has said, you know what, global free trade is bad for blue collar communities. It's bad for manufacturers. It's bad for auto workers. That stuck with them. And I don't think they had, before Trump came along, had heard anything like that. Maybe since Ronald Reagan talked about it a little bit. So that resonates there. And I think there's a question. In 2016, Trump was able to get a lot of these blue collar workers, a lot of these traditional, maybe Democratic voters or non-voters to come out and support him. And there's a question, well, how many more blue collar workers in the Midwest can Trump mobilize? I think the answer is two-part. One is he going to retain the support that he had in 2016? I think the answer is yes, based on what we saw and heard. And the other question is there greater enthusiasm this time around? In other words, can he boost that turnout from that cohort of voters who maybe didn't turn out last time and maybe weren't as enthusiastic last time? I think the answer to that is yes as well. And the reason I think it's yes isn't necessarily because of anything Trump has done, although he has followed through on a lot of the things he said he would do. It's because of what the Democrats have done, and sort of by exposing themselves in reaction to Trump as this radical party that doesn't care at all about working class, blue collar voters in places like Saginaw.
And that's really a key takeaway. 'Cause I was blown away. I mean, you remember 4 years ago, a little bit less, after Donald Trump won a resounding electoral college victory in the general election, there was a few brief weeks of soul searching. And, this is not uncommon to see in the media when something big breaks. At first, you'll see, especially on cable news, the people who have to be talking all day don't know how to respond, how to explain away this liberal insanity. So they will appear shocked. They'll accept it as a news story. And then they eventually get the Democratic talking points from Pelosi, the DNC, or some of the print publications. And before you know it, everything's changed to this is Russian disinformation, or Russian disinformation is a good guess on most of it. But there was a couple of weeks, people were so shocked from top to bottom that there was real soul searching, both in the media, wondering if they'd misread the entire country, and the Democratic Party that looked out and said, well, maybe are we a party of elites, and these things that we are core to our identity, whether it's transgenderism or global warming, maybe these are luxuries. These are the kind of things at the top of the pyramid where you, as far away from sustenance and shelter and water as you could possibly get. Like, you have to be wealthy and not really give a darn about how you're going to make your wages that day to give or care remotely about these luxury items. And they realized that they had lost the white working class, and they'd also not mobilized a lot of other working class, like Black working class, Hispanic working class, at the level that they kind of needed to. But that went away. It only lasted about 2 or 3 weeks before the talking points started to come through. And suddenly Jeff Sessions was a Klansman. Now, this was just earlier. They'd been saying maybe we shouldn't have called them deplorable. And then it was just Russia, Russia, Russia. It was foreign policy. It's been an absolute disaster. And I think to your point right just earlier, part of the problem with that, or one of the reasons for that, is because they can't actually just make a tactical decision to go back to caring about working class people and union voters, because they don't. It's hard to be untruthful to yourself. The union workers are at odds with the environmentalists, and they're just going to be left behind because they're not in charge of the party anymore, despite what the union bosses and their nice paychecks might think.
Well, and part of the reason that they don't care about the white working class anymore and blue collar workers and auto workers and all the rest is because those are not the vocal, engaged segments of their coalition that have really seized control. I mean, it's not like the white working class congressman from the Rust Belt has the ear of Nancy Pelosi. It's AOC.
And she forces it.
Yeah, the radical left wing of the Democratic Party is the one that's driving the agenda, sort of dragging people like Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi along, kicking and screaming. But nevertheless, that's who they're answering to. They're not answering to Macomb County Democratic auto workers. They could care less what those people think, and partly because those people are not ideological voters. Like you said, the ideological voters are the ones who care about these luxury items like global warming and transgenderism, and that's what the party becomes. Now, to your point about in the immediate aftermath of the 2016 election, you had the executive editor of the New York Times come out with this sort of soul-searching statement like, we have to understand
garment rending and chest beating.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we've got it. We don't understand the role that religion plays in the lives of many Americans. We don't understand, the ravages of the opioid crisis in Middle America. We don't understand the struggles of working people, and we're going to
understand the role religion plays. They don't understand Christians.
No, yeah,
it's insane.
I know, right? And so you had these sort of grand statements, but then where were all the New York Times long form investigative pieces in really digging into the role that religion plays in the lives of middle class Americans? I never saw anything like that. It was just forgotten about, as you said, in this wave of insanity about that Jeff Sessions is a Klansman, and
and a Kremlin.
That Trump is a Putin asset. It was the last you heard was like the last you heard about that kind of stuff was right in the weeks after the election. You didn't hear about it again. We haven't heard about it again. And we didn't hear any indication that these people, many of whom we spoke to on the road, feel like they have a place in the Democratic Party, or that the Democratic Party sort of cares about what they have to say. And we heard
They're
that
forgotten.
Absolutely. And we heard that from farmers, many of whom in Wisconsin traditionally are Democratic voters. And we heard it from
farmers and fishermen, mechanics, bartenders, restaurant owners, name it.
We heard it from a bartender in Minneapolis, for crying out loud, of all places, one of the bluest places you could possibly go, told us, I'm left wing, but voting for Trump.
And he said a lot of his friends are too. He said, I'm center left, and a lot of my friends are center left. And people are leaning Donald Trump because they're sick of these lockdowns, and they are sick of these riots that have destroyed our city. And I said, are you going to vote for Trump, or are you thinking about it? He said, oh, no, I'm going to. And he was sure to say, don't worry, I'm center left. I don't want to offend anyone, but I'm sick of this.
Yeah.
And that was absolutely wild. But there are, and we saw this over and over again, we heard this over and over again from those Republicans who had survived their local elections, who we got to talk to, saying that the blue-collar voters who had come over had really changed this. They had kept them in because they did lose some suburban voters when Donald Trump came around. And now he said that there were a lot of blue-collar workers and other voters he talked to, and they talked to another Republicans who couldn't vote for Donald Trump last time, but are voting for him this time because they felt like he came through on his promises. But at the same time, especially when we took that ferry across, and I went from Michigan to Wisconsin, which, by the way, if you have time, is a great ferry. It's stupidly expensive. I've never been on one that's expensive as that, but it's beautiful, and it's a great way to see.
And it's incredibly fast too.
Unbelievably fast. Don't bring a cigar because you can't smoke up there.
No.
You don't even want to chew. Ugh. As soon as we got there, we went up, and that's an area, the suburbs outside of Milwaukee. Milwaukee. This is Paul Ryan's area. This is where he was the king of the party. This is, chirping secretaries and number crunchers, and the GOP votes for war in Iraq, and the GOP votes for marginal tax rates. Those voters, the educated suburban women specifically, the well-read ones, or at least those who consider themselves as such as they were described, they're fleeing. This is at least what we heard from the local state senator, the state senator we talked to, and then a congressman, state assemblyman up a little north. And that was interesting too, because that night, while I was recording, you were able to blast up and check out the riots. As soon as we pulled into this hotel, we had the bellhop who came up and said, "Hey, you might not want to park outside. They're blocking the highway just up the road, and they might come down here and destroy your car." And as soon as he didn't seem very sympathetic to it, even though he's a young man in the Blue City. So we went up and we were checking into the hotel, and it was a dark-skinned young man. I think he might have. I don't think he was from the United States originally. He had an accent, at least I didn't detect. Couldn't understand. And he said he was clearly angry about the riots and warned us as well. They were sick of them there. And you went up there to this area where suburbanites are leaving Donald Trump because they don't like his tone. And you saw the windows that were smashed up by leftist rioters. So what were some of your takeaways talking to the business owners? You talked to immigrants. You talked to people who come here from refugee camps who'd really seen some things that came to America. And it was really a cool couple quotes you pulled out.
Yeah, it was interesting talking to a lot of the people there in Wauwatosa. Literally, like they were just cleaning glass up and boarding up the windows with plywood all along this intersection where all the storefronts had been smashed up the night before, including some residents, nearby residents. A 70-year-old woman had a brick thrown through her living room window, and a lot of the residents were shaken up. It was interesting, though, and I should say Wauwatosa, this is just like immediately west of Milwaukee, maybe 5-10 minute drive from the city. So it's a near suburb of the city. And it was interesting talking to the business owners and some of the employees. They all expressed dismay and frustration with the damage that was done. But they all also, except for the Lebanese immigrant guy, expressed, we're careful to say, but we sympathize with the legitimate grievances of the protesters. Now, in this case, the Black Lives Matter protesters were rioting over the failure of the local district attorney to indict a police officer who had.
It wasn't even a failure. It was he shot an armed person who opened fire.
Yeah. So back in February, the police fatally shot an armed teenager who had fired. He had either fired at the police or he discharged his weapon. But
he discharged his weapon in the dark. He accidentally hit himself, I believe.
That's right.
But they were chasing him in the dark on top of a parking garage, I think, outside of a mall. And, and they heard a gunshot and they returned fire.
Yeah, so this was not a case of
and there's a black officer too.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It was a black police officer. This was not a case of the police like gunning down an unarmed black youth in the back who was fleeing in broad daylight and who was captured on video. That's not what happened at all. But all of these people were at pains to say like, the worst thing about these riots is that it takes away from the legitimate grievances of the protesters.
Yeah, go attack white people because a black police officer shot a black person who shot a stolen gun.
That's right. So, I was surprised to hear that, given that these people were literally cleaning up their shattered storefront windows. And interestingly enough, the one person who didn't say that and had absolutely no sympathy for the protesters was this Lebanese immigrant who ran a after-school instruction.
So let's not out him too hard.
What's that?
Let's not out him too hard in case the people
that's right. Yeah. Well, he told me, he's like, look, I grew up in refugee camps. I've seen people dying in the streets. He's like, I have no idea why people would do this in America. He's like, I love America. America's given me everything. I don't have to worry about anything in America. It's the greatest country in the world. And these people are crazy who are rioting and breaking glass.
And he didn't even say that to you at first because he was kind of, standoffish, a little careful, and his business had just been shattered.
That's right.
All he was trying to do was help the community. This is a real community helping business. I personally benefited from this chain of franchises growing up. He grabbed you as you were walking out, and he almost whispered to you like it was a secret. Like he had seen some real things. He'd seen real violence and real sadness. He couldn't understand what was going on.
It took him a while. You're right. It took him a while to warm up to talking to me. Obviously, he was still cleaning up. There was still like shattered glass on the floor, and he was still boarding up the windows. But he did. He grabbed my arm as I left, and he's like, "Look, I spent years in a refugee camp, and I've seen people die on the streets, and I know what it's like." And he said, "I love America. America's the greatest country in the world." And I asked him if he would be opening up later today, and he's like, "Absolutely." He's like, "We're not going to let these people stop me from doing my job and from opening this business." He's like, "Plus the kids, they need instruction." And so, in a way, like the guy, the Lebanese immigrant, with a heavy accent, gave the most American response of anybody I talked to on that street. But circling back around to sort of the macro political question here, a lot of these people in Wauwatosa and suburban Milwaukee that are Paul Ryan type of Republicans are not going to vote for Donald Trump. They can't get over his style. They are offended by him. They want to say the right things about Black Lives Matter protesters. They do consider themselves well-read. And so the question, I think, certainly in Wisconsin is, are there enough blue-collar workers, farmers, rural residents, people who may have voted Democratic in the past, are there enough of them that can be mobilized this time around, in addition to the people that were mobilized in 2016, to offset the loss of these suburban voters who are not going to vote for Donald Trump, maybe didn't vote for anyone last time, but are either not going to vote this time or are going to vote for Joe Biden in November? And I think that's the central question of these two states.
And I'd never been to Wisconsin, and it was to my detriment that I had not, because I'm from New England. New England's not quite as bad as New Yorkers, but we don't New England's the best. But to go to Wisconsin and to see the beautiful foliage and the wonderful coastline and these areas that are just absolutely stunning in the rolling hills, it's really wonderful. So we got to travel, and that was a great opportunity. By the way, I know coronavirus is very frightening, you all, and you don't get all the amenities that you would like to get. But this is a really great time to travel. Especially on Delta Airlines and other places, you get no one sitting next to you. The national parks are empty. Businesses are excited to see you. So it's a cool time and to get out there if you can. We went up to Door County, which is a place that's a little more interesting. I voted for Barack Obama and then for Donald Trump. But more interesting than that, kind of covered some of that, was the dairy farmers we spoke to, and those who, there's a lot in the press who are saying, how can these farmers stick with President Donald Trump? There's a trade war now going on. He said he was going to fix trade, but now there's a trade war. China's coming after them. Canada's coming after them. Not anymore with Canada. They're losing a lot of money, and farmers were going under. They really were. By the hundreds and hundreds. But we talked to some farmers who were completely backing President Donald Trump on this, and the way that they explained it to us, and it was difficult at first to have understood from Washington, D.C. or New York, or the style of business where you have to answer to your investors every single quarter or every period. They said we're in it for the long game. We talked to the former head of the Dairymen's Association, who said, I'm a third generation farmer. I've been through mad cow. I've moved from Canada to the United States. I'm passing this farm down to my son. I haven't had a good year in 5 years, and 2020 was supposed to be the first. I think it was 5. And we didn't get that, but all the things are right now for the next year to be good, because the president actually came through. The Republicans came through on this, and a lot of these guys who had been conservative socially conservative, and as he was, but a lot of them had been traditionally dyed-in-the-wool Democrats, the kind of guys who worked with their hands and didn't trust the GOP of Paul Ryan. They were playing a long game. They didn't leave, and they were ready to continue on and vote for the president. So those, there are a lot of dairy farmers in Wisconsin. There are thousands of farms. It's not just like you see in some other states where they're an attraction and rare.
One of the things that struck me about the dairy farmers, and specifically about the gentleman who's former head of the Dairymen's Association, was the feeling I got from him that he thought that Democrats think they're too stupid to figure out what the long-term game is. They're too dumb, and that just
he felt talked down to.
He felt talked down to that, like, oh, that temporary tariffs or getting hit from China on a short-term basis was going to be enough to sway him away from Donald Trump, and he almost felt like insulted that that Democrats would think so poorly of him that they wouldn't think he couldn't see the long-term benefit to confronting China and renegotiating NAFTA and doing these things that will put American manufacturers, American farms, American workers back on solid footing vis-a-vis sort of the globalization that's been going on for the last 40 years. He was adamant about that. And I think that Democrats are making a mistake if they think that short-term pain for multi-generational farmers is going to be something that moves the needle at all in favor of Joe Biden. I just don't think it's going to.
And we saw a lot more of that blue collar support that Donald Trump is hoping comes out for him in Wisconsin, a place that is highly contested. Joe Biden is absolutely leading in, although Joe Biden is leading in by half of what Hillary Clinton was leading in there at this time 4 years ago. Says something to you. We went to an ATV parade about an hour and 20 minutes east of the Mississippi River, which is the western border of the state. I've never been to an ATV parade. I've never heard of an ATV parade. Granted, I hadn't heard of a boat parade until this year. I love them, by the way. They had their all-terrain vehicles. They were decked out in flags of Donald Trump on Rambo's body. I think it was Rambo. Or they had Trump MAGA hats, Trump shirts. This is a county that had switched 30 points to support Donald Trump after voting for Barack Obama. That's a massive, massive swing. And there were a lot of people who, while the host of this event, the woman who organized it, had voted for Barack Obama the first time, she said a lot of those people were not political. That they never had an ATV parade for Mitt Romney. They never had a boat parade for Paul Ryan. This was a new thing. And that is something that I think the Republicans, this election could go either way, for certain. But the Republicans can look at it and say, we've never seen this kind of enthusiasm, especially from people who are beer drinking, afternoon, take out the ATV folks, good people, the kind of people you like to hang around.
And not just an ATV parade. I don't think Republicans have ever seen like a flag, like,
I've never seen a Romney flag. I don't think since Barry Goldwater.
Like a Romney flag or a McCain flag or the whole like panoply, the whole universe of like folk art and crafts that
Trump mailboxes, Trump tambourines, Trump switchblades.
It's like something out of the 19th century. I don't think the modern Republican Party has ever had a presidential candidate that inspires the kind of enthusiasm that produces flags and homemade billboards and plywood signs and all of the things that you see being sold wherever there are Trump supporters or whether there's a Trump rally. That's totally new, and we saw that in Macomb County outside Detroit. We saw that in all the way through central Michigan and all the way through to western Wisconsin. And I do think it is anecdotal, but it does speak, I think, to the level of enthusiasm a lot of these places have for Trump, who, like you said, these are not political people. And a lot of them are not traditional Republican voters. And I think the woman who organized this ATV rally admitted to you that she voted for Obama in 2008.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I agree. I came away with the same reaction going to the college to the west on the Mississippi River in La Crosse, talking to the priests and talking to the locals, which they have a real town and gown rivalry in that town for sure. A lot of Trump support. And looking at the polls, I felt the same way that there's something that they're not reflecting, and there's a real excitement for Donald Trump that didn't happen. It is anecdotal. I'll be heading to Pennsylvania this week with David Marcus from the Federalist. If your wife will let you, maybe we'll get you, because I know you have a newborn. Maybe we'll get you back on the trail again. And thank you for joining us today, everyone. Thanks for listening. Tune in for the next episode. I'm Chris Bedford here with John Daniel Davidson. And as always, until next time, be lovers of freedom and anxious for the fray.